Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Best of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that, of course, covers the Arizona Cardinals, and we are in the middle of our 14 shows in 14 days previewing the Cardinals' 14 regular season opponents. And in this edition of the show, the focus is on the Cardinals' Week 6 game when they travel to Lambeau Field to take on the Green Bay Packers. With me to preview the Packers, talk about their season, their offseason, the upcoming season, I've got one of the writers over at the Packers Wire, and that's Paul Bretl. Paul, welcome to the show. Nice to meet you. Again, this has been, I love this experience because, one, I get to talk to guys that I've been on the network for a while, and in your case, this is the first time we're meeting.
It is. I appreciate you having me. I'm always happy to talk Packers and looking forward to it.
Awesome. So, obviously, last season was, on my case, I viewed it as a surprise. Now, granted, it didn't start that way. It just, but they got hot. They start out the season 3-6. Then they close out the season winning 7 of their last 10 games, 4 of their last, they win 6 of their last 8 in the regular season, to squeeze into the postseason, pick up a postseason win against the Cowboys, only to, I guess it wasn't just Aaron Rodgers, right? It's the Packers lose to the 49ers in the playoffs. It's not just Aaron Rodgers, it's now Jordan Love as well. Tell me about last season. Like, how was that season, especially the way it looked at the start?
Yeah, it was really a tale of 2 seasons for the Packers with how that started. And you mentioned their record early on, and coming into the season, I'm not even sure if organizationally the Packers knew what to expect, but they're always going to tell you the ultimate goal is to win. It's Super Bowl expectations in Green Bay every year. That's what they're always going to tell you. But really, the ultimate goal of last season was to figure out, can Jordan Love be the long-term answer at the quarterback position? What they didn't want to end up in is no man's land. Like, that's kind of the worst place to be in the NFL. You either want to know you have your guy or know, all right, we got to be looking for our guy. And they clearly found out that they have their guy. But in the early portion of that year, it was tough to know, and it wasn't all on Love. There was chaos going on around him. The offensive line unit was struggling. They had a receiver unit extremely young, a tight end unit extremely young. So you have guys running the wrong routes, guys not on the same page. And there wasn't much of a run game either. So it's really difficult in those situations to sit back during that first half and truly evaluate what you have in Jordan Love, because he's a first-time starter. And like I said, there was a lot of chaos going on around him. But during that second half of the year, those parts that I just mentioned, the offensive line play, the receiver play, that started to work itself out. Along the offensive line, the Packers started a rotation in-game at left tackle and right guard. That bolstered the level of competition. Matt LaFleur, Adam Stenavich, Luke Butkus, they all talked about how that was a key part in that unit turning around, because part of the early season issues was there was too many long down and distance situations that the offense was being put in. As we all know, the defense has the advantage in those situations. Defensive front can pin its ears back. When it's 3rd and 10, 3rd and 12, there's only so many routes you can run. So the secondary has the advantage as well. But they started to find success, give Jordan Love more time, find success in the run game, especially when Aaron Jones was back in the mix. And now you're operating from 2nd and short, 3rd and short. For Matt LaFleur, the play caller, that opens up the playbook for you, opens up opportunities in the passing game. And then again, we saw the emergence of the Packers wide receivers. It was several weeks into the season, and Matt LaFleur is talking about how there was still a learning process taking place, not only for the receivers, but for the coaching staff, and truly trying to figure out, all right, where do these young players, what do they best do? how do we put them in the best positions to be successful? So it wasn't just the players going through a learning curve last year, it was the coaches as well, and trying to figure out how all these different players, new players, many of them, fit together. And during that second half of the season, we really saw that start to take off again because of all of those components around Jordan Love coming together. And then, again, we saw Jordan Love's growth on display. Don't get me wrong. This isn't me saying that all those other pieces were, it was definitely a piece of the puzzle, but Jordan Love showcased his ability to be a top talent at the quarterback position.
Yeah, it's he started the season, his first two games. Like, you look at the yards, it wasn't impressive, but he was sacked only once in each of those games. 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. That was, hello. Now, granted, it was against 2 teams that were not expected to be that good. I mean, they beat the Bears, lost to the Falcons. What was kind of the season arc? Obviously, 6 touchdowns, no interception the first 2 games. The last 8 games were incredible. Over the regular season, 18 touchdown passes, only 1 interception in the last 8 games. What was it about Jordan Love's play that last year? How did that arc go? How did it? Obviously, you talked about the supporting cast, but how did he look?
I think there's a play from the playoff game against the Dallas Cowboys that just encapsulates the growth we saw from Love. It was a touchdown pass to Dontavian Wicks, but we're going to take the end result out of the equation because the growth that we saw over that final 7-8 games, whatever it was on display in that one play. And it was the processing standpoint. It was pre-snap, changing the protection at the line of scrimmage because the Dallas Cowboys were showing blitz. Once the ball is snapped, it's looking off the defender while that pressure is coming in. There was a blitzer who still got through. He didn't panic. He didn't leave the pocket. He went through his read. He made the throw with the defender in his face, put it on the money in the end zone. Like, that play right there, I thought was just a perfect encapsulation of Jordan Love's growth in that play over the second half of the season, because it showed the processing. It showed the ability pre-snap. It showed the ability to remain calm and poised in the pocket when there's pressure around you. It showed the ability to deliver an accurate pass. And I think that was, one small sample, obviously one play, but a good example of the trajectory he was on during that second half of the season.
Something that I noticed in the few Packers games that I watched last year, how similar, like, obviously Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love don't look the same, but if you watch the way that Love moves in the pocket, his poise, his arm motion, he looks a lot like Aaron Rodgers. There are a lot of physical techniques that he picked up that he mimicked his former teammate.
Yeah, there's definitely some mannerisms, especially if you watch the footwork. There's a lot of off-platform, almost, off the back foot. Sometimes stuff that if you're a quarterback's coach, you're not teaching, not advocating for, because it's not part of the fundamentals. But, Jordan Love has the arm talent. He has the arm strength to be able to make those throws just like Aaron Rodgers does. And so you see some of those mannerisms taking place. And, they've spent, 3 years on the practice field together. And Aaron Rodgers was always very, very, helpful towards Jordan Love. He was always willing to help Jordan Love out on the practice field, and you could definitely see that coming through. And to that footwork point, Tom Clements, who's been the Packers quarterback coach, he's going on year 3 now. He was the Packers quarterback coach back when Aaron Rodgers was first drafted as well. So there's definitely, in the teachings, in the drills, obviously some of that's changed over the years because what's required of the quarterback position has changed from nearly 20 years ago when Aaron Rodgers was drafted. But a lot of those core fundamentals, core teachings, core drills that Rodgers went through as a young player with Tom Clements. Clements is doing the same with Jordan Love right now, and that footwork is a continued emphasis for Jordan Love this offseason. Tom Clements has said that he can often tell how the play is going to end up just by watching the quarterback's feet. No pun intended, but that's the foundation for success. That's the foundation for your mechanics at the quarterback position. So that's been a big focus for Love this season, maneuvering the pocket, remaining balanced when he's on the run to help him deliver those accurate throws.
Interestingly enough, the success that they have, they go 9-8. They make it to the postseason, but they did it without a 1,000-yard rusher. They did it without a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Interesting. Who else emerged, and was there anything disappointing about the supporting cast? I mean, statistically, you don't have the big numbers, but you've got a lot of guys. You've got Jaden Reed had almost 800 yards. You had Dotavian Wicks with nearly 600. Romeo Dobbs, 674. You had a whole bunch of contributors. What was good and what was bad about what was good? Okay, what were highlights and what were lowlights of the supporting cast?
I think the definite highlight was just the number of contributors that the Packers have. And, that's been a question this offseason. Do you need a true number one? And that isn't to say that they don't have someone who could emerge into that role, but the fact that they had legitimate each week, 6 receivers, 2 or 3 tight ends, the running backs are active in the passing game. Like you have 8, 9, 10 guys that could legitimately get the ball on just about any play, regardless of the situation. And one, that's a credit to the skill position players. That's a credit to Jordan Love as well, where he showed that he's going to go with the ball where the defense dictates, where the read dictates. And for a defense, that's challenging. You can't hone in on one guy. You can't even hone in on 2 guys. So that leads to better spacing, more room to operate. It's more one-on-one matchups for the skill position players to take advantage of. And I think that was a real advantage that the Packers had last season, because if you're a defense, or almost regardless of the situation, you got to be ready for anyone to get the ball. You got to be ready for just about anything. And I think that definitely played to the Packers' advantage on offense as a whole. And I think that's going to continue to be an advantage this season. As far as the negatives, I mean, honestly, there's not much that really comes to mind for me. And the reason that I say that is because it was such a young group. Wicks, Reed were rookies. Tucker Kraft, Luke Musgrave, rookies at the tight end position. Dobbs and Christian Watson were only in their second NFL season. Like the ups and downs that they went through early on that I described earlier, to me anyways, my perspective, like that's expected. You have rookies coming into the NFL or being thrust into these massive roles right away. Like there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be growing pains. And through that early portion of the season, some of those mistakes they looked repetitive. And so you were wondering at that time, like, is this going to be figured out? But clearly they were able to do so. So with how that season ended, that surge from those playmakers, I don't think that there's, no reason to have nothing but optimism for this group.
I will say this about the Packers. It's from a fan perspective, as not a Packers fan, how sickening it is to have the last 30 years seamlessly, seemingly, to go from Hall of Fame quarterback to Hall of Fame quarterback to a great young quarterback. I started following. I remember Don Majkowski barely, but to go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers, have won the base. Now, granted, the ending of Favre and the ending of Rodgers, their time in Green Bay, it wasn't the best. Obviously, is it felt like there was an impending exit coming at some point. But to have just the one dip in Aaron Rodgers' first year starting, and to basically seamlessly going from Rodgers to Love, even though the win-loss, you get into the playoffs, that's not fair. That's not fair. I hate it, because as a Cardinals fan, since 1992, we've had like 80,000 quarterbacks and only 3 of them have been good.
I forget who it was, so if I credit the wrong person, but I think it was Mina Kimes with ESPN. She tweeted out what a grueling 2-month stretch of uncertainty for Packers fans at the quarterback position.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you get the offseason. I will say this. Favre brought offseason drama. Rodgers brought off-season drama, but once it was on the field, it was great. And then I honestly, from an outsider perspective, I really got I really appreciated the Hard Knocks last year when it was all about Aaron Rodgers with the Jets, because you got to see him with his teammates. You saw him and how absolutely serious he is about ball, and how absolutely amazing he is as a technician about every little thing about the football stuff. Say what you want about the nonsense that he brings off the field in the offseason, but the football was amazing.
And I think, obviously the stretch that the Packers are on with quarterback, we have to acknowledge there's some luck involved, just the nature of the position. And
it is absolutely just luck.
But it's, it's clearly an organizational philosophy because this has now spanned several GMs, Ron Wolf to Ted Thompson to Brian Gutekunst. It's spanned, different head coaches during that span as well. Holmgren, a few in between, Mike McCarthy, Matt LaFleur, where they're at. But there's this organizational philosophy, and Brian Gutekunst talked about it this past day, prior to the draft. He wants to get back to drafting and developing quarterbacks. They were going into last season, got to figure out if Love's the guy. They draft Sean Clifford. They come into this year, they know Love's the guy. They have Sean Clifford as their backup. They draft Michael Pratt on day 3 of the draft. It's a philosophy, knowing how important that position is, to continually invest into it, even though you have that stability. And I think a big credit as well, obviously, has to go to Matt LaFleur for his ability and his offense to, help bring Jordan Love along, to help put him in situations where he can be successful. And then for Jordan Love's natural ability, obviously, to take over and, put on that incredible performance we saw over the second half of the season.
Defensively, the pass rush got contributions all over the place. One of my longtime favorites, Preston Smith, 8 sacks. Rashawn Gary had 9. Kenny Clark, 7.5. Devontae White, 5.5. Lucas Van Ness, 4. What was the sort of the tail of the what was the tail on defense last year about how things went, who stood out, and who maybe disappointed a little bit?
Yeah, overall, the defensive performance, I think most are going to agree that it was disappointing from just kind of an overall 30,000-foot view of what took place. And that's why they moved on from Joe Barry as the defensive coordinator. Even those sack numbers that you mentioned, the defensive front was inconsistent. There were 7 games where they generated pressures on the quarterback on 45% of their snaps. That's excellent. There were 7 games where they generated pressures on 30% or fewer of the quarterback's dropbacks. That's the opposite of excellent. I think overall they ranked in the bottom third in pressure rate. And then the run game was an issue as well. They had 4 games where they allowed their opponent to get over 200 rushing yards, obviously the most in the NFL. So what they need up front is more consistency. They have the guys. On the back end, they overhauled the safety position this offseason. There were too many explosive plays given up, not enough plays on the football being made in the secondary as a whole. And in part, that was a product of Joe Barry's defense. There's a very off coverage, soft approach where I don't think players like Jair Alexander or Carrington Valentine were necessarily always in the best position to make those plays on the football. The talent's there. We know that. They've invested heavily in the draft and the defensive side of the ball. I don't know the exact number, but there's a ridiculous amount of first-round picks on the Packers' defensive side of the football. The hope this season is that Jeff Hafley's system, which is going to be more aggressive, as particularly up front. They're going from Joe Barry's 3-4 scheme where the defenders up front are responsible for 2 gaps. It's read and react. What's the offense line doing? What's the backfield doing? Fill the vulnerable gap. Jeff Hafley's system in the 4-3, it's a 1 gap. It's an attacking front. You get off the ball, you get into the backfield as quickly as possible. They're going for disruption. They're going for a change in mentality. And so hopefully that, coupled with the talent that they have, because they absolutely have it, is going to lead to better play overall. Because for all the reasons I just mentioned, the inconsistency in the run game, the inconsistent pressure, too many big plays given up. They had 7 interceptions last year. It's the second fewest in football. Not enough plays on the ball being made. Again, at the end of the day, the players are on the field. They have to make plays, but it's the coach's responsibility to draw up game plans and put them in positions where they have that opportunity to do so. And hopefully Jeff Hafley can help with that.
Coming up next on the Res Up Zero podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on to the offseason. What had they done since last season? That's coming up next on Res Up Zero. We're back on the Rise of Zero podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Move to the offseason. Paul Bretl from Packers Wire, one of the writers over there, talked a little bit about the coaching change, moving on from Joe Barry. But let's talk about personnel. You have a couple of losses. A couple of notable losses. Aaron Jones, who moves on to Minnesota. David Bakhtiari, after years of great play, but injury after injury after injury, they cut ties with him. There was talk of retirement. I think he still wants to play. It'll be a question of where he lands. Were there any other major losses that the Packers suffered in free agency?
Those were really the big ones. And, Aaron Jones, not having him in the locker room is, he brings so much off the field to this Packers team, being in that locker room as one of the veteran voices. And, his return from injury last season was a big part in the offensive turnaround. I mean, I think he had 4, maybe it was in 5 games in a row where he had over 100 rushing yards. Like when an offense, especially with the players that the Packers have at receiver and tight end, when you can couple that with Jordan Love with a strong run game, I mean, that's a brutal challenge for any defense. Again, not knowing whether it's a run or a pass, whether they're going to run or pass on any given play. You can't play towards one or the other because they'll take advantage of you and the one that you're light at. Like that opened up so many opportunities for this Packers offense. Like I mentioned earlier, kept them out of obvious passing situations, opened up opportunities in the passing game. So Aaron Jones was a huge catalyst towards the success that the Packers had on offense during that second half surge. So losing him is obviously a big loss, but Packers brought in Josh Jacobs to fill in for him. I don't want to use the word replace, but to take his spot on the roster. And being in that locker room when Josh Jacobs was first signed, you don't have to spend more than 30 seconds with Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, their other big free agent signing, to realize the high caliber people that they are and the high caliber additions they're going to be, not just on the field, but to that Packers locker room. And Jacobs, 2 years removed from being the NFL's rushing leader, dealt with some injuries last year, the uncertainty of the Raiders offense. So, someone obviously that's going to need to bounce back. And for the reasons I mentioned with Aaron Jones, for what he added to the offense, the Packers are, to be at their full potential, to reach their ceiling, they're going to have that run game to lean on, just because it opens up so many other opportunities.
They add Greg Joseph. That I will say that you guys have seen Greg Joseph. That's a risky move, isn't it?
It is, especially since particularly at Lambeau, I don't think he's fared too well over his career. But yeah, that's one of the honestly bigger position battles taking place this summer, is at the kicker position. They drafted Anders Carlson in 2023, and man, he went through the ups and downs that come with, being a rookie kicker. And the Packers, LaFleur, Gutekunst, Rich Bisaccia, special teams coordinator, from the moment they drafted him, they set the expectations that, hey, kickers can take a little time to develop. They're going to go through ups and downs. We know this is part of the equation. But my guess is that when they were saying this in April and June and September, they didn't necessarily know that they'd have the opportunity to go to the NFC Championship game with Anders Carlson kicking. And, they gave him that time. They gave him that patience to develop and come along. And there was good as well. We often heard Rich Bisaccia talk about his ability to bounce back. And to his credit, he never missed more than a kick in a row. He always did find a way to bounce back. But, this is a team with Super Bowl expectations. They have to get the kicker position right. And so they brought in some competition for him this summer. And you invested the draft pick into him. You hope that Anders Carlson can win that. And the reason I say that is because, Greg Joseph, he's, at this point in his career, we know who he is as a kicker. He's not going to be your long-term 5-6 year option at the kicker position, where if Anders Carlson can come out and win that competition, he's in year 2. You invested the draft pick in him. He's someone that if you figure it out, you're like, all right, we can rely on this guy for a long time. And this is coming off the Packers having Mason Crosby here for a really long time at the kicker position. So that's something that they're going to have to get figured out this summer. It's something that's going to have to get worked out. And the difficult part of that, and LaFleur's talked about, is, you don't truly know until the intensity gets cranked up, till they're in those, high stress situations. But it's tough to recreate in training camp. It's tough to recreate that exactly in the preseason. So they're going to have to find a way to best evaluate who can make those kicks in those high pressure situations.
Another addition was Andre Dillard, a guy that was highly touted, a really high draft pick, but hasn't quite panned out as a really good left tackle. Is the plan for Dillard to be their left tackle this next season?
I don't believe so. I think so. When he was signed, it was before the draft. I think that was one of those veteran additions you make to bolster your depth, to help bolster the competition. But, Rasheed Walker was their left tackle last season after David Bakhtiari's season ended. He went through some ups and downs. He's a 2022 seventh round pick. So this last year was his second NFL season, first time getting in as a starter. And, the LaFleur offensive coordinator, Adam Stenovich, talked about how they really liked what they saw from him. It just came down to consistency, being consistent over the 60, 70 snaps that he's going to be on the field for week to week. But I think he's the front runner for that left tackle spot. Their first round pick, Jordan Morgan, he's someone that they've moved all up and down the line during offseason programs. He's lined up everywhere except for center so far. So they're trying to find where he fits best. But his main position, his only position at Arizona, was left tackle. So I think those are the first two options. But when it comes to Dillard, like I said, I think he's there for depth. He's there for competition, but his contract is non-guaranteed. He's not even guaranteed to be on this roster, in my opinion. I think he's going to have to showcase that he's someone that can be relied upon. The Packers like his athleticism. They like his fit in the system, but I don't see him as being someone that's going to be on their starting 5 week one.
So you talk about the draft, Jordan Morgan, Arizona. You don't know where he quite fits yet. What made him? What do you think it was that endeared him to the Packers?
I think it's twofold. I think that they really liked his. I think one is his versatility. Again, played, I believe, almost all his snaps at left tackle at Arizona. But one of the first things Brian Gutekunst said, after they made that pick, he came down and was speaking with us, was that they believe he's someone who can play guard. And we've already seen that during OTA's minicamp. He's played both tackle spot, both guard positions. And the Packers absolutely they covet versatility on the offensive line. So the fact that they could get him, someone who plays those, who they believe can play 4 spots, I think was incredibly valuable to them. I think the fact that tackles his primary position, the first round is typically for the Packers a position or a round where they're going to take premier positions, pass rusher, tackle, quarterbacks. I think he fit that mold as well. And then his experience, an experienced player coming out of Arizona. And, when I believe it would have been his 2022 season when he had the ACL injury. A couple of I can't remember for his Gutekunst or the scouts that the Packers had speak with us, but they had talked about with how impressed that they were with his work ethic during that rehabbing from that injury and how quickly he was able to get back on the field. The Packers always talk about bringing the right guys into the locker room. And so I think they really like that mentality, that work ethic that he brings to the table. And where he's going to end up, I'll be honest, I'm not sure right now, but once they find a spot for him on the line, and realistically that might not come till maybe even a few weeks into training camp, because it's really tough to evaluate offensive line play when the pads aren't on during off-season programs. So they're going to see how he performs when the pads are on. And I think once they can do that, he'll focus in on 1, maybe 2 positions max, and that Packers starting offensive line will start to take shape. But he's had a ton on his plate. Not only jumping from college to the NFL, but playing guard, and not only playing guard, but playing on the right side at guard and playing on the right side of tackle when he only played on the left in college. So he's been taken on a lot. But what I will say, the Packers, they don't put a ton on a player's plate if they don't think he can handle it. They have shown that they will bring even first round picks along slowly and make sure that they're ready to go before giving them a full workload on Sunday. So the fact that he's being asked to do so much early on, I think speaks to how highly the Packers think of him.
Round 2, they go with Texas A&M linebacker Edgerrin Cooper and Georgia safety Javon Bullard. Do either of those guys figure into what they're doing this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Javon Bullard's going to be, my guess right now is he's going to be starting next to Xavier McKinney at the safety position. Again, they loved his versatility. Brian Gutekunst said he wanted the 2 safety spots and the nickel slot to be interchangeable. Basically, any one of those players you can move around to any of the 3 just to keep defenses off balance, keep them guessing, offenses, not being able to cipher pre-snap what the defense is doing based on where players are. So I think Bullard's going to be a big factor right away. Like I said, I think he's going to start. Edgerrin Cooper, I think he'll be the 3rd linebacker or possibly the 2nd. It's a 4-3 defense, but 70-80% of the snaps are going to come in nickel, 2 linebackers on the field. We know one of those linebacker spots belongs to Quay Walker. And through offseason programs, Isaiah McDuffie, fourth-year player out of Boston College for the Packers, and he saw significant playing time last year because both Devondre Campbell and Quay Walker dealt with injuries. But right now, he's been taking more starting snaps than Edgerrin Cooper, and I don't think that should come as a surprise. Again, you got a fourth-year NFL veteran at this point versus an incoming rookie who's absorbing the playbook and adjusting to the NFL speed and all of that. So I don't think that's surprising, but I could see Edgerrin Cooper pushing McDuffie for those starting snaps as we get into training camp, as he gets more reps with the pads on. But man, Edgerrin Cooper brings some high level speed to that Packers linebacker position. And if it's him and Quay Walker on the field at linebacker, they're going to have some serious speed and playmaking potential at that position.
The rest of the picks go like this. Round 3, USC running back Marshawn Lloyd, Missouri, and also in round 3, Missouri linebacker Tyron Hopper. 4th round, safety Evan Williams out of Oregon, Duke offensive lineman Jacob Monk in the 5th round, Oregon State safety Kitano Ladapo out in the 5th round, and then 6th round, another tackle, Travis Glover out of Georgia State. 7th round, you mentioned Michael Pratt out of Tulane, quarterback, and then Kalen King, Penn State cornerback. Any of those guys have any projected role in 2024?
Yeah, the two I'll pick out, running back Marshawn Lloyd. I think, Matt LaFleur talked about, he brings a different element to the offense. And when you're on the practice field watching him, his burst, his acceleration is incredibly impressive. And Adam Stenovich, the offensive coordinator, said that they want to get him involved. So I think he's going to have a role on this team. Obviously, Josh Jacobs is running back 1. He's going to handle the workload, but not just with the Packers, across the NFL. We all know how important that second running back position is. And so it's what I'm curious to see this summer is how things work out between Marshawn Lloyd and A.J. Dillon when it comes to those running back 2 reps. Wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the season, Lloyd has more opportunities than A.J. Dillon. In fact, that's kind of what I'm expecting right now. But A.J. Dillon has still been a factor through offseason programs. But Marshawn Lloyd, I absolutely expect to contribute this season. And then Evan Williams, I think he's going to be the 3rd safety on this Packers team. And I think McKinney Bullard will handle the workload, but he's someone that the Packers view as someone who can play in the slot. So I think there's the opportunity for him to potentially see snaps in that regard. And again, it's early, it's offseason programs, but there was some looks where the Packers had 3 safeties on the field, and it was him, Bullard, and McKinney. So I think he's going to have a role in some capacity. We still got to see a larger sample size to kind of figure out where that is, but he's someone that I could see, having some decent opportunities as a rookie.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Red podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and look ahead to the 2024 season. Expectations for the Packers. That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise of Red podcast, Best of Cardinals talk on the web. Packers looking to return to the playoffs. They play in a tough division where the Lions are among the Super Bowl favorites, but you've got the Lions, you've got the Packers, you have an seemingly ascending Bears team, and then you've got big question marks with the Vikings. What are expectations for the Packers entering 2024?
I mean, it's Super Bowl. Like that's the expectations for this team. And after they lost to San Francisco in January, I think that was a Saturday game, and we were in the locker room on Monday. And obviously there was a mixture of emotions. They knew the opportunity that was in front of them to continue playing, to be in the NFC Championship game, but there was a lot of optimism as well because they saw the potential, the players in the locker room saw the potential that this group has, and having a full off season to continue to hone in on their craft, another year of experience for so many young players. I mean, we hear about that all the time, that year 2 leap. Like there's a lot of guys on this team who could make that year 2 leap for the Packers. So expectations are high. And, LaFleur, Gutekunst will always say that expectations are high, but this is a team that, expects to be in the mix for the Super Bowl.
Do you see this team as Super Bowl is like, do you think that that's a reasonable high-end expectation for this team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, it takes a lot to get there. It's really hard to get there, as Packer fans have seen over the years. They've had they've had this elite level of quarterback play, but getting to Super Bowls, winning Super Bowls, that's a whole nother level to get to and to accomplish. So does that, obviously that doesn't mean it's, going to happen or guaranteed or anything like that. But yes, we look at how this offense finished last season. Again, I just talking about those leaps from the young players in their second year in the system. And if Jeff Hafley can help elevate this defense, if this offense reaches its potential and is a top, 5, top 3 unit in the NFL, the Packers don't necessarily need, you don't need to pair a number 1 defense with that. What they need is a top half defense, a top third defense to help them, get over the top, just to provide more balance. And so I think the pieces of the puzzle are absolutely there, but as we all know, it's a long NFL season. things happen all the time to throw things off track.
The season with 4 very winnable games, seemingly. If you're looking at it's a lighter load on the back end once you hit December, because after you play the 49ers, Dolphins, and Lions, all teams with big expectations. You play Seattle, which is an unknown. You play the Saints. They're meh at best. You play the Vikings, who we don't know what they're going to be exactly. And then you close the season with the Bears. Rattling off 4 wins there at the end of the season wouldn't be unheard of. And the schedule doesn't look overly difficult for a team that has that sort of expectations. You've got some top teams. You've got Miami. You've got San Francisco. Of course, you've got Detroit twice. You've got Houston. Got the Rams. But overall, it doesn't look like overwhelming. And the league this year with their schedule did a lot of kind of unbalanced, like 2 and 3, games in a row at home or on the road. And y'all don't have that. You've only got 2 home games in a row at a time. You've got you're right. I'm sorry. You've got only once on the season do you have 2 road games in a row. You do have a 3 and 4 game stretch at the end in December where you're on the road, and you also have a 3 and 4 game stretch at home in October. What did you think about the way the schedule lined up?
Yeah, I think for the most part it came out fairly favorable. Like you said, there's not these long road stretches that the Packers have. Their bye week is in the middle portion of the season, which I know most NFL teams want. I think 2 years ago it was like week 5 or week 6. Last year is one of the last weeks, week 13, week 14. So there's a nice built-in break in there for them as well. So I think as looking at it on paper, there's opportunity for the Packers in that regard to capitalize. But so much of the playoffs is, are you playing your best football at that time? Because particularly during the last Rodgers run with the Packers, we saw them go 13-3 those few seasons in a row. But are you playing your best football at the end there? And in a couple of those instances, they weren't. So I think for Packers fans, what they'll want to see is just kind of a steady build. You don't want to peak in the middle of the season, even if your record ends up fine, even if you end up 12-5, 13-4, whatever it might be. How are you playing at the end of the year? And last year is a prime example of that. They were 9-8, squeaked in the playoffs, but they were operating, offensively as one of the best teams in football. And you see them going to Dallas. You see them have the 49ers on the ropes in San Francisco. So I think for Packers fans, and really any NFL fan with your own team, that's what you want to see. Are they continuing to progress, and are they playing their best football at the end of the season? And to a degree, that takes wins and losses out of the equation a little bit.
Yeah.
Are you playing at a high level?
In terms of wins and losses, how, playoffs aside, how many wins do you think this team is capable of getting reasonably, like their ceiling in the regular season? You already said that Super Bowl is kind of the ceiling. What would you think is the floor for this team? Like, if things go wrong, we're not talking like major injury like Jordan Love, like if things are disappointing, what do you think the floor for this team is?
Because the expectations are high, I feel like that's a high floor. I think this is going to be a playoff team, and I guess a low, if things don't go well in that regard, it'd be, making the playoffs as a wild card and then getting bounced in that first round. That's kind of where I see the floor being at this time. Again, just basing off what we saw at the end of last season, where the expectations are, the ceiling kind of sets where the floor is, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
I think that the playoffs are that's the floor for this team, or that's what it should be, assuming health, all that stuff. And not making out of that first round, I think, would be disappointing.
And they host the Cardinals. The Cardinals head to Lambeau Field in Week 6, October 13th. How do Packers fans view that game against the Cardinals? Is that a game they've already in their mind have penciled in a win? Is it a game that they keep their eye on just for the challenge, or how is that game viewed on the schedule?
I think it's a game that most Packer fans are going to believe that the Packers should win. I think, since it's fairly early on in the season, roughly a month in, there's still, I'm guessing, going to be a learning curve, some figuring out for the defense in Jeff Hafley's new system. And when you get a mobile quarterback like Kyler Murray, I think that that's someone who could really stress that defense. And so I think that that's where, some potential issues lie for the Packers in this matchup. But I would guess if we took a poll of Packers fans, most would think that that's a game they should win.
And with that, we will end this edition of the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, as we've previewed the Green Bay Packers who the Cardinals face in Week 6. We've been talking to Paul Bretl from Packers Wire. Paul is not only on Packers Wire, he also actually runs the Colts Wire site. As I was talking before the show, the Colts coverage pays the bills. His wheelhouse is Packers. Is there anywhere else that you are getting your football writing on?
Nope, that's all of it.
All right, and Paul, is there any social media that Cardinals fans, if they want to bother you there? Obviously, you're Packers and Colts, so it's going to be a little bit different in terms of, I don't know how many times my listeners, but are you on social media at all?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Bretl. That's Bretl.
Excellent. Hey, Paul, thank you so much for your time. That'll wrap up this edition of the show. We'll be back with another opponent preview tomorrow. That's Paul Bretl. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.
Rise!